Hello, my name is Terry George. I'm a film director and screenwriter. Back in 1986, I wrote a small play about Northern Ireland and took it to an independent theatre on New York's West Side. The artistic director there was a man called Jim Sheridan. He agreed to put on the play, and for the next 6 months, he both directed and acted in it. We became fast friends. Our families hung out together. Our children played in the parks and playgrounds of Manhattan and the Bronx. Subsequent to that, Jim and I went on to collaborate on 3 movies: In the Name of the Father, Some Mother's Son, and The Boxer. And our daughters, Oorlagh George, Kirsten Sheridan, and Naomi Sheridan, grew up in the film business and developed very successful careers themselves. Each of them has been nominated for an Academy Award. Tonight, I'd like to talk to them about the experience of growing up in filmmaking families, of collaboration within those families, and of the evolution of film from those days in 1986 to today. Welcome to the Sundance Film Festival 2021, which is both virtual and satellite here in Key West, Florida. I have with me Jim Sheridan, my partner, friend, collaborator, and his 2 daughters, Kirsten Sheridan and Naomi Sheridan. Kirsten is in LA, Naomi's in Dublin, and also my daughter Oorlagh, who's in LA. I'm in Key West. And tonight we want to talk about all in the family, growing up in the film business, and why these 3 fantastic women wanted to be part of that at all, given that I begged them, my 2 children, Seamus and Oorlagh, to find some other occupation, and I suspect Jim might have done the same. So perhaps let's let Jim talk about the first collaboration with Naomi and Kirsten.
Kirsten was in my left foot, looking out the window at the beginning, and at the end she was at where Daniel Day-Lewis gets his award, and Naomi had one line which Fran remembers to this day. What was that line, Naomi?
No, nobody.
Darren roll.
You can barely hear her saying it. No, nobody.
I know,
So
yeah.
gentle.
I was freaking out.
And then they weren't on the field because that was too far away, but they were a bit on The Name of the Father. And I suppose the first real collaboration was in America, right?
Well, I remember a non-collaboration that we were really upset about called Into the West, because you told us that for research we would all get ponies and go across Ireland while you were writing the script, and me and Naomi were like, yes, but somehow that didn't come to pass, so we were devastated.
Yeah. Oh God.
The lies we tell, indeed. Yeah.
We're going to get horses and we're going to be cowboys for 2 months.
Yeah, well, Oorlagh was, you were the extra in Some Mother's Son in the prison. And
in the school, and I looked directly in the camera, and it was the only take you had. And I'm still in there, just looking right into the camera. But actually, on road trips, I think that you guys wrote In the Name of the Father, didn't you, on a road trip? Like, I've always wanted to, I'm always like, Kirsten, Naomi, and I should do a road trip. Because that's amazing the way you guys kind of approach those things.
We did. There was a couple of road trips. We drove from LA to Colorado.
Yeah.
Memorable trip with Robert Dornheim, and talked about it. Where I remember in the Colorado River, your dad needed the bathroom, and I asked him. I said, "Don't go in the bush," and he went into a bush, and he came out like he was fired out of a rocket, because apparently there was a snake. in there. Something we hadn't encountered in Ireland, yeah. So yeah, that was a memorable road trip indeed. Working on that, and then we wrote it in the name of the Father. But oh, and the other extra was your mom, Oorlagh, in the name of the Father, where she shouted the memorable line from the balcony, "Look at the balls on him."
It really juts when you hear family members. You can't actually enjoy a film the same way, because you're like, there's no way anyone buys that's just some extra, even though no one but you has ever heard that voice. You have a very good cameo there. Is very threatening.
Oh yeah. That's my claim to fame.
Memories of my childhood of being shouted at.
I took the trousers off Daniel.
Yeah.
And people go, "Is that you? You look very experienced at that."
Actually, while we have you, I would love to hear. I love the opening sequence of In the Name of the Father. And it is, when you go back and watch it, not only does it have such empathy, it's extremely complicated. It sets up politically what's going on, these alliances, the thieves, everything. How long did it take you guys not just to like write and come up with that? And did you have the song from the beginning, and also just the actual setup of the camera work? Because I really think it's one of the great opening scenes, and it just sets up a pacing to that movie that's so brilliant, which is like, this is not going to be a heavy courtroom drama. This is going to be about the hearts and minds of people.
Yeah. I think, chaos is always a good instrument to explain. The more chaotic, the better, because you can, explain things that are unexplainable, really, the song, the Jimi Hendrix song, I think was put to it later, and I loved it. And the sound guy, who was English, hated it, and he wanted to put some source music he found. He hated the whole Jimi Hendrix song.
But yeah, I mean, it took nearly a week for the whole segment, didn't it? Because it was in 3 different places, and the roof obviously was different, and then the chase sequence. But you're right, I mean, that was Jim, sort of the 2 kids in the barrel, all that classic improvisation, that he brings to the set. But I remember there was an executive from Universal arrived on the set, and she arrived in a pure white anorak, in the middle of this chaos. And it was like, she'd never seen chaos like that in her life before on a movie set. But yeah, all those days as extras on the set obviously sort of gave you guys a false impression about how wonderful it was. Tell us about the first adult collaboration in America.
I remember actually, my dad had written a couple of them, and then he approached me and Kirsten, and he was saying, let's write a film about, growing up in New York. And I was like, a film about my childhood? There's no way I'm doing it. And then he got, then he was very clever, because he got Arthur Lappin, the producer, to meet me and have lunch. And he was like, Naomi, like, let's do this. And it was all very formal. And then I was like, great. And I started doing it. And then I think Kirsten had done some herself. And it was just amazing that I think before we all came together and brought it together, we got so much out of it, because I had so many different memories than Kirsten, and then when we were all talking about it together, it was like, so there was loads of stuff we did remember, but then there was also loads of added stuff, or you remember things differently, and I think that was kind of really interesting to experience,
We all had our own truth. Situation.
Yeah. And what was your recollection of it, Kirsten?
Yeah, it was kind of like writing a diary. It was the easiest job you've ever been given. But then after, what was interesting was doing the improvisations later on when we were closer to shooting, and I was pregnant with my first kid, and my dad was directing me. And because Sam Morton wasn't available for the rehearsals, so I was playing Sam Morton's part, but as a writer. and I was pregnant and she was pregnant in the film, and Paddy Considine was playing my husband, but he was my dad as the writer. So there was a lot of Freudian weirdness, a lot of therapy. But it was great because you got to see how, you know, like I think once my dad had a camera in his hand, it became a different animal, and it somehow became very real and dynamic. And so all of those lines that Paddy would throw out or Jim would throw out, you know, would end up getting into the script. And it was just such a strange way of working, but I loved it because it was kind of alive.
We went to cast those two little kids. The Kirsten was there, and she had some kid she liked, and he maybe did about 2 lines, or maybe no, he didn't do anything. And there was this kid that looked, I thought, a lot like Kirsten, and I gave her the script and she read it and she was perfect. And I thought, oh my God, she's going to be like an American actor kid. And so I said, Kirsten, is there anybody else? And Kirsten said, oh, that other kid there. So I gave it to the other kid to read. And while she was reading it, the Bulger kid, what's her name? Emma grabbed me by my jacket, and I couldn't move because she was pulling my jacket real hard. And when I turned around to her, she said, is she reading my part? Right? And I looked at her like, oh my God. And I didn't want to say, because she didn't ask it like an adult, you know, she kind of thought she was the part, she was it, you know. And I didn't want to break her sense of ownership or whatever, or faith or childish trust. So I just stared her out and I said, no, nobody's reading the part. It's your part. And I cast her there and then. And then she said, well, what about my sister? And I said, well, what age is she? And she said, she's 11. I said, too young. Did you not read the script? It says 14 for the older one. 14, not 11. And she said, well, you should try her anyway. And I said, oh, okay. So I went down and got the other one and got in the back of a car and we did the scenes. And it was so obvious she was right. So I rewrote the script for an 11-year-old, you know.
Sarah was reading all the same books, like she was reading Narnia and all the stuff I would have been reading at that age. And Emma was like real, like, hey, everybody, like I remember Kirsten being real outgoing. So it was mad, like they were.
Yeah, it shows.
I got to meet Sarah last year, and she's on an FX show. She's such a brilliant actress, and pulling her at such a young age that way, she's amazing.
Yeah.
You know, on the very first day, on the first set, on the first moment that when something went wrong, I went, shit. Okay, and she said, Jim, can I have a word? And I was like, yeah. And then she moved away from the crew and they were all watching. And she said, Jim, it's okay to curse in front of me. I'm 11. But my sister's only 5 and it's rude to curse in front of her. So I'm going to have to ask you to stop. So I said to her, I won't be able to stop. So she said, oh, I said, so look, I said, I just get nervous when I'm doing action. So why don't you do action? And I said to the 5-year-old, and you say cut. And that's the way they did the whole movie. So within about 2 days, the older one was going, okay, stand by, roll sound, hold on, there's a helicopter. What lens are we on? Okay, yeah. And she knew more about movie making than I did.
Naomi and Kirsten, were you on the set for most of the shoot?
Kirsten was a bit.
Yeah.
We kind of thought actually not to I think we wanted to give them a bit of free reign and not think that they had to like pretend to be us, you know what I mean?
Right. But
yeah.
Here's an interesting thing, because basically the only sets I've been on, pretty much, except for a bit of HBO, have been Jim's sets, right? So my directing experience comes from that, which induces a lot of chaos into the set already.
Which was that?
Well, I mean, Within the Name of the Father was the main one, and then I did Some Other Son, and then a bit of The Boxer. So, but you don't, as a director, I don't even like going on other people's sets. You're just, there's nothing for you to do, but you don't have experience. It's not like, well, maybe with you guys, where a plumber's apprentice, the son of a plumber goes out and watches his dad go to work. Is that the evolution for all of you? Kirsten, start with Kirsten, and then go to Oorlagh, and then Naomi.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like even from my left foot times, it was just like another family, you were immediately in another family, it felt like, with hair and makeup and everyone around. And so I suppose what I learned most from my dad was like, honesty, I suppose. He'd be like, the people would go, what do you think? And he'd go, I don't know. What do you think? And I had it in my head that directors have to have all the answers and have to be God, essentially, but he would just open the conversation up to everyone from like the prop guy to the taxi driver, and their opinion was sometimes more important than, than the head producers or whatever. So I think I learned a lot of that, and also just being able to be vulnerable in front of like 100 people. There's good lessons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was on your sets a bit, and I would have like a specialty role, like, in Hotel Rwanda, doing something very specific. So I often didn't see the bigger thing. And then I came up as a PA, and one thing that I always think is funny is that, like, I still think I have a PA's mindset of how the set works. Whereas it's funny because you and Jim kind of came in at the top of film sets straight into the creative roles. And I think if you've come in where you really have a sense of like how much hierarchy there is, you're more nervous sometimes, because it was a long time before until my film where I was in that, like, a lot of times on a set, although there's all these creative decisions made at the periphery, it's really that actor director huddle where the most intense decisions are made, the most, and sort of your DP as well. And so it's interesting because it's like, that's something you never, even having been an actor's assistant, you never really pierce that until it's your own day or know what's going on in there. And that's one thing that was very helpful, to sort of know that you guys are very actor driven always. Well, I wasn't going to do film. I was the opposite of this. I was like, I'm never going to be part of the chaos that these people are part of. And I very much was planning to join the UN. And I was going to do this JPO test when I graduated college, because I studied international relations. And it was right at the moment when you were about to go to do Hotel Rwanda to do the research. And you were like, come, we're going to shoot this documentary behind the scenes footage. I'm researching this project. And when we went, it was such an amazing project. And we were there when Paul was going back to Kigali for the first time since the genocide. And it was so emotional and felt really important. And also we got access to these people who were entrusting you with their story. It just felt like, how could you step away from that? And I think your argument to me at the time was like, this is where the power is. This is where stories, like, and it's true to a certain degree, like, I don't want to denigrate the UN, but like, there's a bureaucracy of what you can get done. And I think that it's not that we necessarily think films can change the world, but they can change individual people's perception of the world. And so they definitely, I mean, I feel like that was the right decision if you want to do something that's about how storytelling, I mean, you guys are amazing people to come from, because you very much I think of storytelling as having a power to heal and recalibrate histories that have been told in a certain way, that have been told in a colonialist way. And so it's amazing to work in a medium that does get to like put the post-colonial narratives out there, put narratives that are disruptive. And so like, once you've had access to that, also once you've joined the circus of filmmaking, you kind of can't go back to a day job, because you're like, oh, the fun, the madness of, with Hotel Rwanda, like one of my jobs was like buying 2 vans where I had to go with like literally bags of cash because checks didn't exist. And that kind of thing where you can just make things happen in a good way, but also a crazy way, is not something you want to leave again and like go back to a 9-to-5.
And Naomi, you were much more involved in the writing side of it for quite a while till you directed your short. So, we're hearing all this wonderful stuff about, bags of cash and buying cars and, young actors, but the meat and potatoes of all of us careers is about writing, which is basically staring at a blank screen and hoping something will magically appear there that is of substance. So why stick with the hardest part of it all?
I don't know. Writing, I mean, I actually love writing. It's even though it drives me completely crazy, and I'm always like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I find like it makes me so happy that it's almost like a therapy, And I think the more it's like when people talk about, if they get like going to the gym or something, it's kind of like it's a similar thing where you once you keep, start doing it, you kind of feel you have to keep doing it, and it really it's just something that I love. But I think my dad kind of instilled that love of story for me, because since I was like, since I can remember, he always included us in every like play or book or script because he'd be reading it out to us. He'd be actually writing in the kitchen while all the madness was going on and people were cooking and doing whatever. And I remember like going to sleep, and it's a sound that's gone now, but your typewriter would always kind of help me go to sleep because it's a real comforting sound. So I think that's why I got that's why, and I think as well I don't know, Dad, you always encouraged it. I think to go into that world. I think you were very encouraging that way.
I guess it's inevitable. I mean, Seamus, my son's also, he's an AD now, and you follow in the family tradition but it is literally like joining the circus, at least the directing side of it and the production side of it. And it's very collaborative, whereas, I mean, Jim is pretty much the only person I ever really felt comfortable writing with, because we'd argue genuinely from a place of belief about the story. And anybody else I tried with, I didn't feel I was getting enough fight back or something like that. So the collaboration, at least at the writing side of it, is a difficult thing, I find, But at the same time, I always said it saved an enormous amount of time, because you can spend a week thinking something's the greatest thing you've ever written and it's shite. And whereas when we were doing In the Name of the Father, Jim would just say it's shite, or I would say it's shite, and that was it. It was shite, and we moved on and found something else. And we would argue. I remember famously we were arguing in the canteen do you remember at Universal? We were over something, and we were arguing away, and everybody thought we were going to start fighting or something. They were literally shocked, and they'd never seen people argue like that. And then, who was it? Was it Denise Denovi or somebody came over and sat down and said, "Oh my God," But yeah, so yeah, the collaboration side of it. But Oorlagh, with you, it was more production at first, and then wanting to do your own thing. Haven't seen.
Yeah, it was just like, when we came back from Hotel Rwanda, I definitely wanted to stay in the film industry, and I wanted to on that film, because I had done the research with you, I ended up kind of doing everything that was Rwandan based in terms of getting articles that were original to the place. And so when I came back to New York, I wanted to sort of understand the set more from the bottom up. I don't know. I think that you find a story sometimes, and then the story takes you where you want to go with it. Like we made The Shore, and The Shore, it didn't ever occur to me that The Shore is related to my film, except that when you see them together now, they're so directly related. But it's like you guys having made In the Name of the Father and having done it together, I produced The Shore, which is sort of anecdotally Terry exploring a homecoming story in Northern Ireland. And the fact that it's such a funny place to bring an American child, because they're going to be constantly surprised at the division in society, and also in the ways in which you have, Irish family is just a phenomenon unto itself. Like whether it goes from funerals to sitting around making food or writing scripts together, it's just a collective identity that I didn't have in America. And when we went back, when we were older, I suddenly discovered. So that story of like what it was like to go back and discover that your family had paramilitary ties or had these political views that were very at odds with the sense of clear right and wrong that I'd grown up with, is just like, why wouldn't I tell that story? It doesn't exist. Why don't we have those stories about like the complexity of actual coming of age stories are often so good versus bad, when in fact most of the world lives in color that is much more complicated than that. So I think when you find those things, one thing I got from you guys is definitely like, you had to do it all yourselves. And that's something that I think is an unusual experience, because you're the guys of the earliest days of the Irish Film Board. And even though Universal and stuff existed, you were always the force that made the film go from script page to final delivery. And that to me, I think, is one of the great gifts, because I think if you just came into the film industry, you would always assume it's going to be there to support you. And now that it's sort of fallen apart in those ways, it leaves Kirsten and Naomi and I always knowing that we are the force that gets it into theaters, that like nobody else is coming to our rescue. We have to make it, those bums go in seats. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that.
So Kirsten, tell us about the evolution to Disco Pigs. With that was your first directing, right?
Yeah. God, I actually did go to film school. I did 3 years, and I did like, a short film a year, and then that led to Disco Pigs. But that was like in the late, Jesus Christ, I don't know when it was. I haven't a clue, so long ago. But it was much, much easier to get indie films financed at that point.
So Naomi, that evolution from In America through what you're doing today and what you're working on, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, since In America, I was just, I went through a kind of experience of writing for a lot of people, like writing commission stuff, doing my own stuff. Then I recently started directing. I just did a couple of short movies, but I'm hoping to direct a feature from my own script, and it's like a thriller based around memory. So that's where I'm at the moment. I did actually, going back to what Kirsten was saying, I was doing a film that I was supposed to be directing, but I hadn't written the script, and it never got there. And I feel there was a part of me that was like, is it because the script didn't originate? It wasn't a story that I just, that came from my head. So I wasn't sure how to really get it done, if you know what I mean. So yeah, so now at the moment I'm trying to direct a feature from something that I've started writing.
So from In America, what was that evolution? Obviously we talked about August Rush, but just the evolution of where you are today and what you're working on.
Well, from In America, yeah, I did August Rush, but actually I was telling Oorlagh the other day, probably I've been telling Naomi for 3 years, I read, or I did a poll of the amount of scripts that I've written that didn't get made. And that was a bad day, because I got up to 42. And so I was looking at it like, okay, that's 42 times I really went to the gym and did a big workout, and now I have the craft, and, but for writers, it's an awful lot of emotional investment into what sometimes feels like a black hole, So I'm kind of interested in writing for TV at the moment, just because it's actually like getting to the screen, and I think that at some point, like after August Rush, that was so many years ago now, it's a long time to not be actually on the screen,
The 42 is money in the bank. You can keep selling those. You never know.
Exactly. Yeah. Some of them I got paid for, maybe half of them, and the other half were like babies.
Yeah, but even if you got paid for
10,000 hours, as they say,
they revert to you anyway. There's a certain reversion. So you've got 40. There's 42 things you don't have to start. Fantastic. And Oorlagh, your evolution from the second unit producer in Kigali to today.
Yeah, no, it was just producing evolution up until recently, and that was, it's somebody. One thing that's great about our families is that normally somebody has to give you permission to be a director, to be a writer, to do these things, and that's such a big barrier for people to get handed the label. And I think because you guys changed, Jim encouraged you to go from writing to directing. You guys were producers. I think that fluidity was with us, and so I was on a producing track and I was a creative executive at a company here that made some interesting independent films. And then I submitted to the Sundance Lab, and that was I felt I needed an external, you have permission to move into the new category thing. And since then, I've been working to get this film made, and it scares me to not have 42 scripts to have put so much energy into sort of one TV project and one film project. On the other hand, the research you do and that expertise sort of carries over, and you feel like, well, nobody can tell me no about that project because it comes from me. So like, I don't need permission from a studio to make that. I'm going to make it.
Basically, it's impossible to get an independent film made without some sort of government backing, and nobody in America, they don't even have the cinemas to show it anymore. Yeah, that evolution is pretty, I think it's a bit frightening. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's terrible. I mean, I was reading this article in the Irish Times today. I just started it, but about how bad the Netflix movies are. And I agree with that. I think there's like, for every 1,000 movies that they make, one of them is good, Mm-hmm. And they don't seem to have a clue. They just seem to be fucking throwing spaghetti at the wall,
But product, isn't it? They need lots of product.
Yeah, but no, everybody's afraid to give out about them because it's a one-horse town anymore. And the streamers will take over, and they won't represent well, small countries like Ireland. And I don't think, and especially because we speak English, and so do the English. So they're kind of like, well, we've served that market. We're doing UK, aren't we? Tick that box,
Right.
So I don't know of any movies. I'm sure that Netflix have made Irish movies. I just don't know any.
No, I think they picked them up after, because we've completely fallen through the cracks. There's no Netflix Dublin office. It's Netflix London, and then Spain, HBO, like Eastern Europe, but Ireland has completely fallen through the cracks.
I think you guys kind of come out of that generation of like independent cinema that got a big budget and was able to go mainstream. And like, it's interesting because you guys are sort of in a first part of a wave of a democratization of the medium, you could say, because of that access that you got. And we're on another part of that spectrum of the democratization of the media, but the amount of money you get when it continues to democratize goes less and less. And I'm completely obsessed with TikTok. I think it's the most entertaining thing ever. And it's, to me, like, I constantly have to ask myself, because I'm editing my film, is my film as entertaining as TikTok? Because it's incredibly entertaining. And I think part of the reason is there's no filter. And we are so used to the world being curated for us and told it's a certain way. And then there's somebody making a TikTok about they were nearly killed in a volcano and they're recovering from head to toe burns. And they're the funniest person you've ever heard. Like, they're just making a 1-minute video each day, but their stories of disabled people, stories of people raised in interracial Mormon families.
But I don't think we can do that. That's for 19-year-olds.
Yeah. Well, I think, but it's then it becomes no budget is the thing. When everything's truly democratized, it also becomes what's able to sail through. And I think that Sundance is really on the edge of how do you support a film industry with films that are increasingly small, but what you are getting is incredibly diverse voices and stories of people who never got to tell their stories now telling their own story. The question is, can it work its way back up the chain, or do you just end up directing a Marvel movie? It's like,
but a lot of that, Oorlagh, is sort of, it's like watching the car chases in LA back in the 90s and 2000s. There's a fascination, it's sort of train wreck stuff. Or, I mean, there are small, like, enormously creative things happening on TikTok, but translating that into telling a longer, more complex story, and trying to, at the same time, I mean, the interesting thing about Sundance this year is, and we'll see how it evolves, there's no collective experience. There's no distributors walking into the Egyptian theater or whatever on, and watching Palm Springs and getting this enormous buzz and walking out the door and deciding they're going to buy it. That collective experience of cinema that we, cherish is lost, except at film festivals, and because of the pandemic, that doesn't exist. But for us now, do you actually? It's an interesting question for all of us. Do you change your writing style because you know that ultimately you're probably going to be watched in somebody's living room, and they're going to get up and make their tea, and or stop and come back a while later, and so forth? That you're not going to get to somebody sitting in a room for 2 hours in the dark with a whole bunch of people around them anymore. What do you think about that, Naomi?
It's interesting because I was talking to someone the other day who was talking about, you know, if people don't go to the theaters anymore, will they stop making those bigger films as well? And they were talking about their own experience watching stuff on Netflix or whatever, and they really don't give it the same amount of time, obviously, as if they're going out to a cinema, you know.
Kirsten, are you finding this now, like working in television?
I think television has probably changed the way features are being written more than anything. You know, like I've noticed with features that they need to be like ridiculously noisy to break through. You know, they either have to be like, you know, I mean, I know Fleabag is a TV show, but they either have to be really personal, like Moonlight, you know, or they have to be Marvel and elevated Marvel, you know. So it's these two extremes. It's like, you know, Bernie Sanders world. You know, there's a huge gap. And so I think that, you know, the way that TV shows are written, which I actually love, because I think people got sick of the 3-act hero's journey structure. And when I watch TV with my kids, who are the TikTok generation, they literally say to each other, do you smell a Netflix algorithm coming up in the next act? And I'm like, what? How? They can sense it, you know? They're like, this is bullshit and this is true. And so, yeah, I think that TV experience of unraveling worlds, it's all about worlds rather than narrative, like thrust, you know. So I think that has made a huge impact on feature film writing. But I prefer the TV structure. Like I prefer a structure that's like kind of unwieldy and can go in different directions, and, you know, rather than like plot point 1 and plot point 2. Like I find that really hard to make unique.
What made your guys' writing team so successful, Dad and Jim, which was that you are very, very structure driven, Dad. You are like a real journalistic writer, and to a great degree. And Jim coming from the character as an actor's background. And I think that bringing that together always had a great impact on the films, because they have great structure, and they also have character in a way not that many films do. They live and breathe and have unexpected things, which is the hard thing to get in when you're trying to get somewhere structurally. Sometimes is the sidetrack.
Yeah, like how critical are you all of each other's work, and when you do work together, how does that work, and when does it not work? How about you, Naomi?
Yeah, you know, I think we're all really honest with each other, and I think that's brilliant. You know, like I think that's the best. You just want that, like, you know. At times it can be, you know, you're like maybe not wanting to hear it, but I think you know, yeah, it's just the best way to be, because I think we've had arguments about stuff, and you know, we've disagreed with feedback which we've given each other, but I know that it's always coming from a place where there, you know, everyone, like my dad and Kirsten, everyone is just trying to make it better and make it work. And I think they have both Kirsten and my dad have a really great sense of story, so it's always great to have that, you know, them as sounding boards and to be able to go to them for advice. And you know, I know me and Dad have had a couple of fights, but sometimes you know, I'll kind of, a couple of days later I'll be like, okay, you were right. And you know, it just takes a while for me to for it to sink in or to mull it over in my head. But yeah, I think that the knowing that everyone is being honest is the best part of it, like, you know. And yeah,
there's a kind of diplomacy in the film industry, some of it, a lot of it, very phony. And when you introduce family into that diplomacy goes out the window right away, because you've already had 30 years of, you know, that. So how do you deal with, super honesty versus the knowledge that, well, this is the way Dad sees it or Oorlagh sees it, and it is what it is. Kirsten, I'll let you answer that one.
I think it's kind of like they say, like, if you wanna what is it, know about a book, read about the author.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of like that. So if I know Naomi and my dad so deep that I know where they're coming from, then I can take the bits of criticism that I want, that are helpful, and then the other bits that I'm like, but that's not the story I'm telling, or that, I'm able to kind of go, that's because they see the world that way, because I know them so well. So it doesn't seem like just criticism for criticism's sake, you're going, like, I'm trying to think of maybe a structural example is the easiest one, like my dad would be like, nothing's fucking happening. Nothing's happening. Like, we're on page 30, something has to happen, or whatever. That's just a bad example. But I know myself,
that's actually a great example. I think that the page, I'm totally at the page 30 rule.
And I made a whole film like that was like completely improvised with no script, which was kind of just for the crack. I made it, to be honest. And I'm not sure I'd ever do it again. But during that, I don't know why I'm talking about that so long ago as well, but I was going, well, the whole point of this film is that it kind of lives in this mental kind of circular structure, so when you start experimenting with structure in a feature film, it can get really dicey, because it's 3-act for the last 2,000 years for a reason, so yeah, things like that, I'm able to kind of go, oh, that's because that's how Dad sees story, so I'm able to not take that personally,
Right.
And also maybe the level they were expected to deliver to sometimes, because I often think that, like, yeah, if you're being given $20 million to do a film, you need to set up the audience's expectations and pay that money back, and you're working within a form. And I often find the notes sometimes for you and I, Dad, can be different, because our expectations of what the audience for our film is might be different. Like, Dollhouse, what the movie Kirsten was just talking about, we were kind of free, if your expectations are lower, to really experiment with the form in a way that wasn't always available if you're coming in as the director of Daniel Day-Lewis, or as the, thing. And that's sort of freeing in its own right.
Jim, do you think that whole thing of experimenting with the form and throwing out the structure, could you do that? I couldn't.
I couldn't, but sometimes I did it when I didn't have a choice, like Dreamhouse, where you've got a mad lunatic production company,
right?
And you're trying to just get some movie made that makes sense,
Yeah.
And in that, I realized that nobody actually had an idea what movie they wanted to make. They were just all trying to figure out what did the boss want, So it was really difficult. But I think it's very hard in movies not to have a 3-act structure. If you had a 1-act structure, it's great, like Robbing the Bank or Run Lola Run, it's great. But it's difficult to go outside the structures with a movie, Yeah. Each image is like, a picture tells 1,000 words. So each minute in a movie is equivalent to like 20,000 words of a novel or something,
Right. Also, each picture costs you $5,000 or whatever,
Yeah.
I mean, I've always crucially, but my fundamental question is, why would somebody pay $15 to watch this? And how are they going to walk out the door at the end of it? What do you want the audience to feel when they leave? And are they going to be, even if it's, if it's depressing, are they going to be motivationally depressed in a way like Kramer versus Kramer or whatever, one of those great depressing movies?
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's an angry movie, are you going to be angry about the killing fields or whatever? That's how do they, what is the audience thinking when they go out the door, and do they think they got value for money? Because for me, we're entertainers, we make, that's a feature. So the kind of experimental side of it, I've never, I mean, if I want to experiment, I'll take the iPhone out there to the beach here and see what happens.
That's a very Irish thing, if I can say, is just that, like, one thing we all have in common, it's just a sense when the story isn't entertaining enough. Like, and for me, I don't think as much about like bums in seats at the $15. I think my film's taken so long to make, like, what's getting me out of bed in the morning to still want to do this? And like, you really, I think people do not spend enough time choosing the story they're going to marry. That because you are going to like be with this story. And if you don't have something worth saying, that is going to leave people leaving the theater having heard a story they hadn't heard before, and maybe seeing something they hadn't heard before. Like, go keep looking. Like, don't rush to do something right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I think interesting in this panel is that within the space of our collective lifetime, we have evolved from the heyday of the independent feature film and the Spielbergs and the Jaws and the blockbusters, right through the Marvel superhero era to the streamers. And now, you guys are millennials. We were sort of baby boomers. The cultural evolution has been so stark that I'm not sure I can write to what the younger generation is thinking these days.
Yeah.
I think that's one great thing about that the streamers have done is kind of gotten, especially in terms of TV, they took away that really rigid structure that was in place for a long time that I did think didn't serve every story. Like there was like regular TV for years was 26 episodes and you couldn't go outside that and you had to do that no matter what. And that was great for a lot of shows, but I think there was a lot of shows that didn't get made because they couldn't kind of commit to that structure.
Look at one of the good things that streamers have done is they've internationalized storytelling. If you have a great story, people don't give a shit about subtitles anymore. I've watched Occupied, the Norwegian show was fantastic. The Bureau, the French spy series is the best. It's Le Carré, it's fantastic. Yeah. And there's stuff coming from all around the world. And being Derry Girls, perfect example.
And I actually think in 50 years, when people look back at a sort of pandemic and Netflix as two things that lead toward an inevitable world federalism, to be honest, and the breaking of those boundaries, here are these two things that showed us that sort of idea of national boundaries are relevant. And one of them was cultural and the other was health.
But what do you hope for Irish cinema? Let's talk about that. Irish cinema and world cinema for the near future, Jim.
Well, I just hope Irish cinema can get made, and like Normal People was a good example. It was a big hit. I think TV, I think it's going to be down to that. I think it's going to be down to people adapting books and stuff like that. I don't know if it's going to be straight up ideas like we had,
Right.
I think it's going to be more intellectual property. You take that and you make it.
But just to finish up, Oorlagh, actually, maybe talk a little bit about, because it is a Sundance thing, your Sundance, what Sundance meant for you getting the film made.
My film went through the Sundance Film Lab, and I wouldn't have made the film without the support that I got there, because it was just like, I went in very much trying to copy other film, like The Debt. And then Peter, the screenwriter of The Debt, was one of my mentors. He was like, you have to make your own film. You have to make the film that makes sense to you. And I didn't feel entitled that, like, some people come in with like a scarf around their neck and they're like, I'm an auteur. And I was very like, this is a craft and I have to copy things and learn my way through. And one of the great things is they really blend those two things together, of saying it's a craft you have to apply to the stories we don't get to hear. And so I was really pushed toward making something unusual. And so, I mean, and I think Kirsten and Naomi and I all work within a degree of magical realism. And that I was really encouraged to put in as part of my film. And so it was exciting. And one of the great things is that, like, at every point along the way, they're there to support you. And now we're in this moment where it's like, my film will be finished for next year and hopefully submitted. But what will cinema going look like? And I think they're at the bleeding edge of trying to save the ability to have theatrical experiences that didn't cost $100 million to manufacture, that we still want to have communal experiences together and sit next to someone and cry. And, and that was strange thing. Right. So I think there's just really propping up an entire industry by bringing in new voices and giving them access to industry and helping bridge what's really collapsed, which is the sort of $5 to $25 million film, and helping filmmakers who make a good first one, who can reach outside their markets, get to that second one.
Well, let me ask you a last question, because it's been great moving on. But all three of you, would you advise your family, future family, or whatever, to go into this business? We'll start with you, Naomi.
I think, you know what? I think I'd have to advise them to follow their heart no matter what. But I'd probably, like, every day have a big, like, lecture or loads of stories about how hard it was going to be, you know, without maybe trying to totally crush their dreams into a million pieces. But no, ultimately I think, of course, I would, but it's definitely a very hard business, I think, you know, and I think at some point I had a sense that it was an easier business, like in the 90s, and it's changing so much, and constantly changing at the moment, that it's hard to kind of keep hold of or know where anything is going, you know. Although I do agree with what Kirsten was saying, I think is interesting, is people were saying, oh, nobody can go to the cinema, that's it for cinema, and I actually think and hope that when something's been taken away from them, there's a bit of a resurgence. So I hope that'll be a positive thing in the future as well, like, you know. Yeah, so, but yeah, I guess I would, except I'd
Kirsten, you already who's
I have an 18-year-old who's in theater, and I was delighted because she's like, I'm going to do theater and I'm going to do lighting design. And I'm like, great, that's an actual job. Yeah. And then this morning we had a conversation, and Leo says, so if I do a short film, and so I'm going to do a short film, and who pays for it? And then I went, and then Leo goes, and how much money will I get when I sell it? I was like, both of those things, we need to talk, you know? So I don't know. I mean, I think it's a pretty tough life, but if you are, you know, you're born that way as well. Like if it's in your DNA, you're kind of born that way, and you can't move away from it. It's like both a blessing and a curse, that's for sure.
And Oorlagh, Flynn, you advise them to be?
My hope is that we've married into family who have like extensive farming, and they are the happiest people I've ever met. And that's a hard job, but they are not emotionally invested in whether or not this particular piece of corn, whatever, grows. And I'm very hopeful that will bring in some alternatives that are like, you know, you don't have to be professional to be happy. You can do something and find your happiness in your family or other things, because I think it's the level of emotional investment that scares me. And how do you keep balance in your life? Because having not gone through having a film come out, I have to wake up every morning being like, of course the world wants to see this obscure thing. And that may not be the case. And so how you balance reality, commerce, art, it's a tricky thing, particularly with the marketplace moving the way we've discussed. So my hope is that if he did want to go into it, you can write your own ticket if you take up production accounting, because there are no production accountants to be found. So if he would like to do something, be in the film industry, let me tell you, he can take up that and then work his way over whenever he wants to.
Okay. And on that note, as I told you, I always thought plumbing was a very lucrative business. And you don't have to worry. You can't sweat over whether a piece of pipe is going to come in with a bad attitude the day before.
That's true.
Anyway, listen, thanks for this. I hope that all of your work appears in Sundance next year, Oorlagh, and in years to come, and on all the streamers. And this has been great. And Key West and Sundance, thanks you all.